Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
EU leaders have given their formal backing to the agreement that will take the UK out of the European Union in 4 months' time. Theresa May said the deal offers a brighter future for Britain, urging Parliament and the public to support it. She was speaking after 27 other EU leaders signed off on 2 key documents negotiated over the last 17 months. The main withdrawal agreement, outlining the terms on which we leave, provides for a transition period until at least the end of 2020. There is also a much shorter political declaration, which is not legally binding, but which sets out hopes for an ambitious partnership with the EU in the future. Well, our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, is in Brussels for us this evening.
No celebration, no fanfare, but a huge and serious step. After more than 40 years inside, deep breath, the deal to leave is done.
There were those who said that reaching a Brexit agreement that worked for both sides was an impossible task. From the start, I rejected that counsel of despair. In any negotiation, you do not get everything you want. You need to identify what your vital interests are and stick to them, but be prepared to compromise in other areas in order to achieve a result. I think the British people understand that.
Her bet, many of you are bored of the rows, the splits and the spats, the officials who've brokered the compromise watching on.
Before Christmas, MPs will vote on this deal. On it will depend whether we move forward together into a brighter future or open the door to yet more division and uncertainty. The British people don't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit.
Can I ask you to be very straight with the public and tell us who, if anyone, you think is pleased about this deal?
What we see in this deal today is a deal that delivers for people, delivers on the vote, delivers in a way that protects jobs and livelihoods and protects our security and our United Kingdom. And, as I've said before, I believe our best days lie ahead of us.
The EU's power players have agreed a Brexit with caveats. A deal where the UK leaves next March, but stays close to the Union, with a lot of final detail yet to be agreed.
Ahead of us is the difficult process of ratification as well as further negotiations. But regardless of how it will all end, one thing is certain. We will remain friends until the end of days, and one day longer.
It is time for everybody to take their responsibilities. Today's agreement will help create the trust and the confidence needed for negotiating our close and unprecedented future relationship.
The agreement was hard fought on both sides, even though sometimes it feels like EU leaders still can't quite believe what's happening in front of their eyes. It's tragic that the UK is leaving after 45 years, Angela Merkel said. But there may be more theatre to come. MPs at home might kick out the deal. Would they budge here then?
This is the deal. It's the best deal possible. And the European Union will not change its fundamental position when it comes to this issue.
Are you concerned that the Prime Minister will not get this deal through the British Parliament?
I think it's not now our concern. It's the British concern.
This is the max we can all do, both Theresa May and her government, as well as the European Union. No victors here today, nobody winning. We are all losing.
There have been many moments when it has not been clear that Theresa May would make it this far. But her next steps, these vital few weeks, will determine her future and the future of the country too.
For the Prime Minister, there is now only one direction. She can't know if Parliament and the public will follow along.
And Michelle, for more than 2 years, there's been a persistent question for Theresa May. Will she, won't she get a deal? Well, she did, brokering an agreement after so many months of very tense negotiations between the two sides. There is a deal, and today is a big, big moment. It's been rubber stamped by leaders from right around the continent. But she has, along with that, an immediate big, big problem. We know already how unpopular this deal, this agreement, this compromise is right across Parliament. Howls of protest from former Remainers and Brexiteers alike. Many of her critics arguing strongly it doesn't have to be this way. There could be a route to a better or a different deal, or potentially even another referendum. But for Theresa May, get used to hearing her again and again try to drive her argument through the middle. With the EU's help, her message: this is all there is.
Laura Koonsberg in Brussels, thank you very much. Well, let's turn then to the detail of what is likely to happen next. Now that the Brexit deal has been endorsed by EU leaders, it appears that the biggest potential hurdle lies at Westminster and Mrs May's chances of getting the agreement through Parliament next month. If MPs do approve it, and it is a big if, it would then go to the European Parliament for approval. If, however, MPs vote it down, then there are a number of possible consequences. They could try to force a renegotiation, a general election, another referendum, or we could leave without a Brexit deal. Well, against all of that, let's join our Europe editor, Katja Adler, who's also in Brussels and who has been speaking to the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker. Katja, over to you.
Well, that's right, Michelle, and we can't forget that today is a very, very big day for the EU as well, the day that EU leaders signed off on their divorce papers with the UK. So the main question for Jean-Claude Juncker in the European Commission had to be, does he really think this is it for the EU? Sure, Brussels says there will be no renegotiation if this deal fails to get through the House of Commons. But is that really the case when we know how hell-bent EU leaders are on avoiding a no-deal Brexit?
This is the best deal possible for Britain. And this is the only deal possible. So if the House would say no, we would have no deal. It's not the intention of the Prime Minister, nor of the Cabinet, nor of the Parliament to go for a second referendum. This is the deal. This is the deal.
And you're trying to help the Prime Minister sell it, actually, by saying this is the best deal possible. But surely it can't be the best deal possible, because right from the beginning, you and other EU leaders said it has to be very clear in this deal that life on the outside can't be as good as on the inside.
If you're out, you're out. You are not part of the decision-making process. This is, by the way, a very sad moment for the European Union and for Britain. And we'll discover in future years why I'm saying today that this is a sad moment. I'm not happy, but I'm happy that we have a deal.
There's a perception in much of the UK that this was a punishment process, the negotiations process, that even though today there were nice words for Theresa May, like from the Dutch Prime Minister, she negotiated in a very tough way, actually that in the end the UK had to concede most of the time.
I don't understand why the British people, and I like the British people for so many, including historical reasons, why they are feeling that they are humiliated. I don't see that, because numerous points of view of the British have been taken into this deal. So this is not a humiliation for Britain.
There is something about the tough negotiations on behalf of the EU during, these Brexit talks that have made some in the UK say, you know what, we're really glad we're leaving. They're inflexible and they don't listen to the needs of the people. What would be your reaction to that? I was always respecting the dignity of the British people, which is the same as the dignity of peoples living on the continent. Britain has voted. It was a sovereign decision. We are highly respecting that decision, although we don't like it. It's also not the end of the road of negotiations, of course. Negotiations on a future trade deal and other relationships start in earnest after Brexit. We'll come back to Gibraltar, we'll come back to fishing, and we could come back to the Northern Ireland border question. I don't think that we can come back to the Northern Ireland border question. We will start in the next coming months the talks about the future relationship, and I don't think it would be wise if I could
would give you first indications on the outcome of these negotiations.
You said to me right at the beginning of this process that you felt it would be a sad process. You also said that somehow it felt like a failure.
Everyone is losing in this.
But is it a failure on the EU's behalf? Do you think it's got this far?
Is it a failure on the British behalf if you are telling people year after year, month after month, day after day, that the membership of Britain in the European Union is a bad thing for the British citizens? So I don't think that the European Union is guilty for the result. It's the responsibility of Britain, only of Britain, of nobody else.
Is there a certain sense of relief, though? The UK was never a happy, enthusiastic member of the European Union. Once the UK's gone, surely you're free to have an EU army or any other things that the UK was standing in the way of.
I always appreciated in my former life as minister and as Prime Minister the British sense of pragmatism. It was a gift given by Britain to the European Union, down to earth, common sense. We'll miss that, but it was a decision of the British people to leave.
President of the European Commission speaking to our Europe editor Katja Adler earlier. Well, the next few weeks will see the government emphasise the merits of what's now been approved in Brussels, both to MPs in Westminster and to the public. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth has been exploring the content of the agreement. Alex.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, this deal is in two parts. The first part is the withdrawal agreement. That is a binding legal text dealing with the way we are leaving the EU. It sets out a transition period, which means after we leave next March, not much will change until December 2020. There's time to be keeping on working on things like a trade deal. It safeguards the rights of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens living in Europe. And it settles the divorce bill. The UK will pay some £39 billion of its current obligations, but it won't continue large payments beyond that. Now, here's the most contentious bit. It says if, in that time, a trade deal isn't worked out, then that transition period could be extended or the Northern Ireland backstop kicks in. Now, that's an arrangement which means to stop checks at the Irish border, the UK would be in a customs territory with the EU, but it would mean some different trade terms for Northern Ireland, and the UK can't just end that arrangement when it wants, and that is a problem for some.
What we're seeing in this Irish protocol is much more than that. We're seeing us staying within the European Union in terms of the single market. The customs union rules will apply to Northern Ireland. We're in the same VAT regime as Europe. We're in the same state aid as Europe. And there is very much a border down the Irish Sea as a result of this, and that's why we can't support this deal.
Now, the government says that backstop probably won't be needed because of the other part of this deal, the political declaration. That sets out plans for an ambitious and deep future partnership, including on trade. But the details haven't been agreed yet. The government says we will leave the single market and the customs union, and we can strike independent trade deals with other countries. The free movement of people will end, and the government will work out a new immigration policy. When it comes to fishing, it says the UK will be an independent coastal state, leaving the common fisheries policy. But future arrangements for access to water and quotas are yet to be agreed. In fact, there's still quite a lot about future relations to be worked out.
So it gets us a lot of what we wanted, not everything. But the question is, can this be that staging post that gets us to the point where we could get everything? And I think with a lot of hard work, it can be.
So critics say all the best bits of this deal aren't legally enforceable. It's woolly, it's unclear. But the government and the EU says it's the best we'll get and insist it does deliver on the referendum result. Michelle.
Alex, thank you very much. Now, the focus today has been on Brussels and the decision of EU leaders to endorse the Brexit deal. But the Prime Minister will now be doing her utmost to sell the deal not only to MPs, but to their constituents, people across the country. So what do voters make of the deal that she's negotiated? Olivia Richwald has spent the day in Skipton in North Yorkshire.
Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales is a prosperous market town, attracts plenty of tourists and votes Tory blue. But in the Red Lion pub it was time for Sunday lunch and a chew over the Brexit deal.
It might be pleasing both sides, And that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to please everybody, and it's not going to be a good deal for either side.
It looks unacceptable. And if enough Brexiteers have left the cabinet because it's so bad, then Theresa May and her Remain colleagues are just pushing it through, and it looks awful.
In the referendum, 53% of people here voted to leave the EU, similar to the national result. Among them, Zoe Venn, who's lived in the town all her life and helps to run the family canal business.
I think it's just dragging on a little bit now, to be fair. I think they could just do with getting the deal done and then we can move forward, really, to be fair.
In the town centre, the local band is on stage. The majority of them voted to remain, but we took two members with opposing views aside.
I think it's a deal, it's a piece of paper that's got something on it. I can't see it ever happening. I don't think this country will leave the EU on those terms. I'm not sure we could leave the EU, but I don't place a great deal of stock in this.
It presented as being it was going to be a simple job, it was going to be a simple negotiation, and actually it's been incredibly complicated. We've been tied into so many different aspects of the EU.
Do you think that me and you, okay, do you think we're going to get a square deal out of any of this?
I think the only thing we can hope is that the country becomes more prosperous in the future, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen for a long time.
Despite their differences of opinion, the band played on. Whether the same can be said for those in power is anyone's guess. Olivia Richwald, BBC News, Skipton.
Well, Theresa May has got agreement on Brexit from her 27 EU counterparts, who signed it off in just 38 minutes this morning. But MPs could yet throw it out. The deal consists of the 585 pages of withdrawal agreement, which is legally binding, and the 26 pages of political aspiration on our future relationship with the EU. If the deal is approved by MPs here, the UK officially leaves the EU at the end of March. We'd enter a transition period until the end of 2020, or possibly longer, in which nothing changes on trade rules, customs and immigration, and the UK pays £39 billion into the EU budget. During that transition period, the UK and EU will try to negotiate a new deal, keeping trade as close as possible while ending the rights of UK and EU citizens to live and work freely in each other's countries, but ensuring the absence of a hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, if we can't agree by the end of the transition period, it could be extended or the backstop could be triggered. The UK and EU would enter a customs arrangement in which we follow the same rules as the EU, which would restrict our ability to negotiate new trade deals. Northern Ireland would be more closely aligned with the EU's single market to avoid border checks. The European Court would still rule on matters of EU law, and the UK could only leave the backstop by mutual agreement with the European Union. Now, this morning, EU leaders queued up to say that British MPs shouldn't expect to be offered anything better if they reject this deal. And Theresa May said the British people didn't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Brussels.
There was no ceremony, there were no farewell hugs. Just one gesture across the table from Chancellor Merkel to Theresa May. The German leader lowers her head and rubs her eyes. Outside, around 20 pro-Remain demonstrators attacked the withdrawal treaty until Belgian police asked them to stop.
Just for the security. I'll ask you to stop this.
Europe's leaders warned that even if MPs voted it down, there wouldn't be a better deal on offer.
I hear a lot of people talking about better deals or alternative deals, and anyone can have a better deal or an alternative deal in their own minds. But an agreement 500 pages long, that's 28 member states can sign up to. Nobody has that. So what's on the table is the only deal that's on the table.
I'm totally convinced that this is the only deal possible. Those who do think by rejecting the deal that they would have a better deal will be disappointed in the first seconds after the rejection of this deal.
In a press conference, Theresa May repeatedly claimed the public backed her approach. hoping that will turn some hostile MPs to back her in the Commons.
In any negotiation, you do not get everything you want. I think the British people understand that. The people voted for Brexit. What people want to see is an end to free movement. The British people don't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit.
The Prime Minister said defeat in the Commons would bring chaos.
It will be one of the most significant votes that Parliament has held for many years. On it will depend whether we move forward together into a brighter future or open the door to yet more division and uncertainty.
There must be, if you want to avoid division and uncertainty, the other side of a defeat, there must be a plan B. You're not telling us that there is just a void, a black hole, nothing on the other side of defeat, are you?
Well, I think you've heard today what has been said by the Commission and by other European leaders, that this deal is the result of significant, tough, difficult negotiations over a period of time. It is Jean-Claude Juncker's phrases were the best possible deal and the only deal possible. I want to deliver Brexit for the British people. This is a good deal that delivers Brexit for the British people, and I hope every member of Parliament will see that and see the importance of that.
Some leaders speculated what Plan B might look like.
Could be returned for the vote of people. It could be new elections. It could be a request for renegotiations. There is at least 4, I calculated.
There was some emotion on display today, but it wasn't universal.
Regardless of how it will all end, one thing is certain. We will remain friends until the end of days, and one day longer.
I don't think that Britain will be a third country like other third countries are third countries. There is between us something which are the remainings of love.
The German Chancellor next door just said in her press conference, she was speaking of her genuine sadness that Britain is leaving. Do you share this sadness?
Well, no, but I recognise that others do. I think that's I recognise some European leaders are sad at this moment, but also some people back at home in the UK will be sad at this moment. But the way I look at it is actually this is for us now to move on to the next stage.
First thing this morning, the 27 leaders staying in the EU met without Britain at the table. Soon, all EU meetings will be like this. Some of their decisions will continue to shape rules for Britain. But Britain will be outside this door.
Well, Gary, I mean, when European leaders say this is the deal, don't expect a better one, is that true? Do they mean it?
They certainly said it a lot today. They said they don't want to unpick the draft treaty, the withdrawal agreement, nearly 600 pages of it. They absolutely don't want to go near that. They wouldn't do it even for people who were staying inside the EU. Maybe they could tinker a bit with the political declaration, the non-binding document, but they put some extra language in that to try and help Theresa May out just in the last few days, and fat lot of good it did her. I suspect in certain circumstances you could see things shift. So if there were to be a general election in Britain and a change of government, if there were to be a referendum and a change of Britain's position in some way, a different mandate, you can imagine it then. Or if Theresa May lurched towards, say, the Labour Party position, got closer to their position and thereby even closer to Europe. But in the process, of course, she would have busted apart the Conservative Party. So that seems like quite a tough order.
What else are you picking up about their attitude towards Britain?
Well, they're a little bit snippy, actually. Behind the talk about how sorry we are to see you go and the rest of it, there was a document that was produced that clearly spelled out they intend to keep progress chasing Britain as to whether we're keeping to commitments. You won't get things like the extension on the transition unless you've satisfied us on everything else. At one point, President Macron actually spelled it out and said, I've got quite a bit of leverage over you. He was talking about fisheries, but you sense they don't feel entirely relaxed about just letting Britain, even if we get there, carry on implementing the deal unless supervised.
Thanks, Gary. Well, we can talk now to the Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, who's one of the big advocates of another referendum, a people's vote, as they call it. Can we just talk about how you get there? I mean, let's assume that nobody changes their minds at the moment and the deal is voted down. How are you going to stop the hard Brexit that Theresa May is warning about?
Well, the Prime Minister has quite rightly talked about the fact that there are three options. In fact, one of those options actually I don't think is on the table, and that is the hard Brexit, which nobody sensible wants and would be an absolute catastrophe for our country. The alternative to the Prime Minister's deal is to put this matter back to the British people. And I think people are now absolutely entitled to look at this so-called deal, which is actually, as you've identified, the withdrawal agreement, and then this political declaration, and compare it to what we have at the moment and our unique membership with the European Union. Compare the two and say, which one actually is better for our country and for the generations yet to come? And people are entitled not only to make that judgment, but actually to have the final say on all of this.
But practically, I mean, how would you stop us going over the edge? You know, there's a clock ticking to the end of March. What actually happens? Is there a vote or what?
Well, if members of Parliament want this to happen because we reach the impasse that it looks like we've already reached and it hasn't even yet come into the House of Commons, then, you know, the power is with members of Parliament to take the next steps. We can, yes, pass a motion that says that we instruct the government to draft the legislation to put Mrs May's deal to the British people by way of a second vote, a people's vote. If that's what members of Parliament choose to do, then these things can happen.
But it doesn't
if we need to, we can extend Article 50 in order to give us the time to do it. Look, I agree with the Prime Minister. Most people are fed up to the back teeth with all of this. But the problem is, this is the most important decision that our country has taken since the Second World War. And we simply have got to get this right. Not just for now, but for the generations to come, because the consequences are enormous if we don't get it right.
She's been absolutely clear. She will not offer a second referendum. So, you know, there are processes that will have to be, you know, you'll have to get rid of her, won't you?
Well, I don't know, and it's not about personalities, it's about doing the right thing by our country. People are entitled to look at this deal, get a grip on the deal, get to understand it, and compare it against what we have at the moment. As I say, our membership of the European Union is absolutely unique amongst the member states, and it's very good in my opinion, and increasingly in the opinion of many millions of people. And it is they who are particularly going to be feel let down, especially the young ones who didn't have a chance to vote in 2016. And I think really importantly, now we know what Brexit looks like. People are not just entitled to a final say on it. Now they know what it looks like. People are also entitled to change their minds.
All right,
and what I'm getting back from most people is that actually they're really, really worried, because nothing, with great respect to the Prime Minister, the idea that this ends the division and the uncertainty is for the birds.
Right, but
because
if the
nothing
vote
is now certain, as you've identified.
If the vote
and
is
the divisions,
defeated,
I'm afraid to say, will continue.
If the deal is defeated and there is then a no confidence vote in Theresa May, how will you vote?
Oh, sorry, if there's a no confidence vote in the government.
No, in Theresa May.
I will vote in. No, that is not what happens in Parliament. If the vote is defeated, the Labour opposition have said that they will put forward a vote of no confidence in the government, and I
yes,
will
but
be
the Conservative Party might have but the Conservative Party might then put a confidence vote about Theresa May. Would you support her?
Oh, I'm not
or would you
getting into all
change
this.
her?
No, I am absolutely not getting into that field of speculation. I'm afraid this really does cheese off millions of people in our country. What we've got to concentrate on is this deal. Compare it to what we've got at the moment, make a decision about that, and let the people have that final say. That, I think, we've got 2 weeks to do that. And I think that that is now really, really important, because, as I say, the certainty and the division's not there. And the other thing which I think is interesting is the Prime Minister talks about a brighter future. You notice she doesn't say a better future, because her own impact assessments say, whichever way you cut Brexit, we are going to be less prosperous than remaining within the European Union.
Got to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Anna Soubry, for joining us.
Theresa May was surely on the money about one thing today. The British people do not, she said, want to argue about Brexit anymore. Well, perhaps, but if that is anyone's Christmas wish, they look certain to be disappointed. She did get her deal in Brussels, but both the French and the Spanish immediately ramped up the pressure on her. You'll be stuck in the backstop forever, President Macron said, unless you give my fishing fleet access to your waters. You might have to concede joint sovereignty over Gibraltar too, said the Spanish Prime Minister. And as for coming back for another deal, if this one is rejected by the Commons, Forget it, said Brussels. There is absolutely no chance of that.
It's the deal she's spent her entire premiership negotiating. If today's gathering to sign it off was largely ceremonial, done and dusted in just 40 minutes, it is clear the one thing that really unites them all is that they won't come back to try again if this deal fails.
This is the deal on the table. I don't think there's anything more, no.
If they think by voting no they will renegotiate, I think they're wrong. In March it's finished.
As they sat down around the conference table, Germany's Angela Merkel seemed to be expressing sympathy with Theresa May's task from here on in. They know how hard it's going to be to get the package they've agreed through the House of Commons. Many once again expressed their sadness that Britain is leaving, but that it's Britain's choice and these are the terms. At her press conference afterwards, Theresa May, too, had clearly decided the best selling point to her own MPs is that this is the only offer there's going to be. The alternative is chaos.
The British people don't want to spend any more time arguing about Brexit. They want a good deal done that fulfills the vote and allows us to come together again as a country. This is the deal that is on the table. This is the best possible deal. It's the only possible deal. James.
Prime Minister, you are appealing today to the British people over the heads of Westminster, but only MPs have a vote. Why don't you take your strategy to its logical conclusion, give the people a vote on your deal, and if they do back you, you're home and dry?
We overwhelmingly voted in Parliament to give the British people that vote. They made their choice, they have delivered their vote, and I believe it is a matter of trust in politicians that we now deliver on the result of that vote.
And as a parting shot on her way out, she said that, unlike her fellow leaders, she is not sad Britain is leaving. At a joint press conference, the three most senior men in the Brussels hierarchy all expressed their desire that the House of Commons does ratify this deal.
Take this in consideration. This is the best deal possible for Britain. This is the best deal possible for Europe. This is the only deal possible.
Regardless of how it will all end, one thing is certain. We will remain friends until the end of days.
But as if to emphasise how weak Britain's negotiating position may soon become, France's President Macron spelt out French fishermen's demands for access to British waters before a future trade deal is signed.
Ensuite, en matière de pêche,
for fisheries, we will concentrate our efforts in order to obtain access into the British waters before the end of the transition period.
L'intérêt, évidemment,
So she takes her deal back to Westminster in hope of a miracle. What happens if she doesn't get it through? Does she step down, try again, or accept there'll be no deal? She absolutely wouldn't say.
And James joins us live from Brussels tonight. James, the French and the Spanish playing brutal hardball today. Is that a sign of things to come, do you think?
Well, not at all helpful at the moment, given the task that Theresa May has ahead of her. To remind you, what was agreed today is the divorce terms. The terms on which we live and trade together in future, they have still to be negotiated, and that future trading arrangement can be vetoed by any one of the 27 other countries, which is why President Macron, without even being asked today, made it completely clear that a deal that would make the Northern Ireland backstop, for example, redundant in the future, we won't get that, he said, unless French fishermen have access to British waters. The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, saying that Spain had never been in a stronger position vis-à-vis the UK in terms of getting concessions over Gibraltar. None of this, of course, will go down at all well with MPs in Westminster who are already unhappy with it. Perhaps that is why she was seeking to appeal over their heads today to those people she said are fed up with talking about Brexit, trying to get public pressure behind just saying, let's just get this done. But she only has a few weeks to achieve that.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, if the going looks distinctly tough ahead in the rest of Europe, it arguably looks even worse back home. There were plenty of politicians out and about on the airwaves today, but to be honest, almost none of them had any good news for the Prime Minister.
As the Prime Minister returned home tonight, capturing the elusive deal with the EU was probably the easy part. Now she's facing the hard sell back here on a deal that even her ministers admit is a compromise.
This has
a lot in it that people who strongly supported Brexit wanted. It has an end to free movement of people, ending large payments to the EU, much less jurisdiction for the European Court of Justice. But there are other things in it that we've got to work hard for after we leave the EU, but we can only get those other things when we've left the EU.
As part of her appeal to the public, the Prime Minister has written an open letter to the nation. In it, she promises the deal is in our national interest, one that works for all, whether you voted leave or remain. And after we leave the EU next year, she wants that to be a moment of renewal and reconciliation for our whole country. But the DUP hates the deal so much it's even threatening to break its confidence and supply deal with the government, leaving the Prime Minister with no majority.
We'll not be voting for this, and I understand that there are many others across the Commons that will not be voting for it either. So what I'm calling for is a better deal. I'm asking Theresa May to listen to what her parliamentarians are saying and to listen what those of us who are supporting her in government in terms of the confidence and supply agreement are saying, because remember that confidence and supply agreement was to be about shared priorities in terms of Brexit, and certainly for us this is not something we could sign up to.
Scotland's First Minister has taken to Twitter to deride the Prime Minister's letter, claiming almost nothing in this desperate letter is true. And as for looking for Labour's support,
what Theresa May's managed to do is to unite a coalition of almost everybody against her, which is why I think it's impossible for her to get this through.
So the scene is set for an almighty battle here in Parliament. The numbers are against the Prime Minister right now, and she only has a few weeks to get her message heard above the cacophony of criticism. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
And Robert is here to attempt to assess all of this once more. Listen, like many people watching this programme, I've listened to various politicians over the weekend, but I got very little clarity about what's going to happen if this deal goes down.
Look, we're in this really extraordinary position, Tom, that, you know, only a few months ago, people would have hailed it as a dramatic victory for the Prime Minister if she got a deal done as soon as today. People were talking December, talking about March. The deal is done, but you and I are talking about what happens when it collapses, and the reason for that is some 90 Tory MPs are saying they're going to vote against it, Labour's going to vote against it, the SNP is going to vote against it. She, Prime Minister, will tell the Commons tomorrow that if it's voted down, we are, quotes, back to square one. Now, I have absolutely no idea what she means by square one, and I very much doubt she's going to spell that out. But her Cabinet colleagues tell me there are only two options at that point. One is for the Cabinet to formally adopt no deal as their policy. That is, crashing out of the EU with only a handful of modest arrangements to make sure airplanes can land. But, you know, the great fear of ministers is that would lead to great queues of lorries at both sides of the channel. We'd run out of essential food, medicines, and many ministers, let's be absolutely clear, this is not my words, many ministers say that would be a catastrophe. And at least 5 members of her Cabinet, Philip Hammond, Amber Rudd, the two best known, would resign at that point. So I think it's inconceivable she's going to go for a no-deal Brexit. What then? Well, again, talking to members of her Cabinet, they say the only option at that point is to go to the EU and say, we need a delay. We need, as a country, time to sort out what kind of Brexit we actually want. But that, frankly, is not by any means an easy option, partly because although EU governments tell me they are expecting such a request, they don't want to give us much time. They don't want us participating in the European parliamentary elections. We would have an extra 2 months to sort ourselves out, and right now, I don't know what you think, I think it's going to take us longer than 2 months to work out whether we want to stay or how we want to leave.
I've given up thinking anything. That's the best policy here. Speak tomorrow.